On top of a hill, a majestic oak tree defied storms and centuries, guarding a secret that few knew. When a young girl and a storm crossed paths with its destiny, something extraordinary happened. What mysterious connection links this tree to the sky, the earth, and the lives it touched? Lightning lit up the sky with overwhelming force, followed by thunder that made the hill tremble. On top of it, imposing and solitary, stood the old oak tree, its branches seeming to reach for the clouds. Beneath the storm's mantle, the tree stood firm, as if defying time itself. For 4 centuries, it had weathered storms, winters, and the passage of generations, serving as the silent guardian of the nearby village. At dawn, when the storm subsided, the first rays of sunlight revealed the oak's true majesty. It was more than a tree. It was a beacon for sailors navigating the nearby coasts, a sanctuary for birds, and a symbol of continuity for the villagers. Its lower branches were filled with nests, home to pigeons, owls, and blackbirds, while its sturdy roots held the very earth together, preventing the hill from collapsing. To all who knew it, the old oak was immortal. Yet, it was not immune to the passage of time. The mayflies, those tiny creatures that were born with the dawn and died by dusk, danced around it, oblivious to the oak's eternity. It watched them with a mix of curiosity and compassion. Each new generation of mayflies, identical to the last, seemed to live with an intensity the oak could barely comprehend. How can they so easily accept their brief existence? It wondered, but silently, it envied their purity in living fully in the present. Every day, little Leah climbed the hill to visit it. She carried a worn notebook and spoke to the tree as if it could respond. She told it stories of the villagers, her own dreams of becoming a painter, and the legends she had heard about it. "They say you protect our souls when we are lost," she said one day, stroking its bark. "If that's true, then you are the most important tree in the world." Leah was its most constant companion, and though it could never answer her, the oak felt something akin to happiness every time she sat beneath its shade. Life in the village unfolded with its usual monotony. Fishermen mended nets, mothers sang old songs, and elders told stories by the fire. But everyone knew that, atop the hill, the oak tree remained vigilant, a presence that had witnessed more winters than any human could imagine. And though no one said it aloud, they all feared the day when the tree would no longer be there. The first breath of winter arrived like a cold whisper sweeping over the hill, stripping the last leaves from the old oak tree. Each falling leaf was like an echo of time, a reminder that the cycle of the seasons spared no one, not even a tree that had lived for over 4 centuries. Its bare branches now reached toward the gray sky, and for the first time, the oak felt the weight of solitude. The migratory birds, which had found refuge among its branches during autumn, departed one by one, their wings sliced through the cold air, their songs seeming to promise a return. "We'll see you again in spring," chirped a flock of swallows before disappearing beyond the horizon. But deep within its wooden rings, the oak knew this time was different. Winter brought not just cold, It carried a call it could not ignore, a whisper inviting it to rest. Snow soon covered its roots, embracing them with a white mantle. The oak had endured harsher winters than this, but something in its essence began to change. The dreams that usually accompanied it through the cold months grew more vivid, more intense. In those dreams, it saw its branches reaching beyond the clouds, touching the stars. It felt an indescribable peace, but also a melancholy it could not shake. One afternoon, shortly before the first major winter storm struck the village, Leah arrived at the hill wrapped in a woolen cape. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and in her hands she carried a small wooden box. She sat at the oak's base, as she often did, and began talking to it as she unpacked her contents. "I'm going to make this winter special for you," she said with a smile, pulling out small wooden figures she had carved herself. Stars, hearts, and even an owl that resembled one of the tree's former inhabitants. "I'll come back at Christmas," she promised, as she hung the figures on the lower branches. "I'll bring you lights and ribbons so you'll be the most beautiful tree of all. That way, even though winter is cold and dark, you'll always have a little light with you." Leah looked up at the tree, hoping for a sign, and though the oak could not speak, something in the stillness of the moment seemed to respond to her. That night, as the snow fell more heavily, the oak reflected on the girl's words. For the first time in its life, winter wasn't merely a period of rest. It felt like the prelude to something greater, something that drew it with a mix of fear and hope. And though its wood creaked under the weight of the snow, the oak resolved to wait. Perhaps Leah's promise would grant it one last spark of life before answering the call that awaited. Christmas Eve arrived with a silence so profound it seemed to drape the hill in a shroud of peace. Snow fell in delicate flakes, covering the old oak in a shining layer that reflected the starlight. On its branches, the wooden figures hung by Leah glowed faintly under the moonlight, like tiny lanterns. It was then, on that special night, that the oak felt its consciousness begin to fade, plunging it into a dream unlike any other. As it closed its perception of the physical world, the oak was transported to a place where the seasons danced in an eternal cycle. First, it felt the renewing warmth of spring. Its branches blossomed with flowers, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of moist soil and the song of newborn birds. It could feel its roots deep in the earth, drinking the energy of life itself. Summer arrived in an explosion of light. The leaves on its branches quivered under the sun, and children's laughter filled the air. Villagers rested in its shade, sharing stories and meals. Though immobile, the oak could feel the joy of those moments. It remembered Leah with her notebook full of drawings, and the fishermen who had found solace beneath its shade after exhausting days at sea. Autumn unfolded like a golden tapestry. Its leaves turned shades of amber and scarlet, slowly falling to the ground as villagers gathered crops in the fields. The oak heard the crunch of children's footsteps as they played in the dry leaves, and the harvest songs of the farmers as they completed their work. Everything was so vibrant, so full of life, that the oak felt as if each season were paying tribute to its existence. Finally, winter returned, but not with the harshness of its reality. In this dreamlike world, The cold was not oppressive but serene. Snow fell gently, blanketing the landscape in an ethereal glow. The villagers' carols echoed in the distance, songs that spoke of hope and unity. Among these melodies, the oak heard familiar voices, Leah's laughter, the words of gratitude from sailors who had used its silhouette as a guide, and even the soft chirping of swallows that had promised to return. For the first time in centuries, the oak no longer felt the weight of time. In this dream, it was eternal, its existence woven into every being that had ever sought refuge under its shade. Each season was a reminder of its purpose, of the countless moments of connection it had facilitated. In this world, the oak realized that it had not only lived, but left an indelible mark on all who had surrounded it. As the dream continued, the oak felt something within it preparing for change. It was neither sadness nor fear, but a quiet acceptance. Like an elder reflecting on the best moments of their life, the oak allowed the seasons to keep dancing around it, sinking even deeper into this Christmas dream. In its deep dream, the oak began to relive the most tense and challenging moments of its long existence. It was as if time, instead of moving forward, folded backward, forcing it to confront the darkest episodes and most harrowing trials it had endured. First came the storm of its third century. The sky turned black, and lightning struck its highest branch, leaving it dangling like a mutilated arm. It remembered the pain that coursed through its trunk and how the villagers of that time, instead of abandoning it, rushed to reinforce its roots with fresh soil and stones. That act of care sustained it, not only physically but also in spirit. Then came the harshest drought the region had ever faced. For months, the sky offered not a single drop of rain. Its leaves withered, and the birds that once nested in it migrated to find better places. Desperate, the villagers had considered cutting it down for firewood, but an old woman from the village knelt at its roots, pleading for one more chance. A week later, the rains arrived. The oak also relived the fear it felt the day a group of men with axes appeared on the hill, measuring its trunk as if it already belonged to them. It heard the whisper of the wind, which seemed to warn it of its impending fate. But before the first axe could strike, the village children came running, forming a human barrier around it. With tears in their eyes, the children shouted, "Don't take it away, it's our tree." Finally, the men relented, leaving with their tools and ambitions. As these memories passed before it like lingering shadows, the oak also saw visions of the lives it had touched. It witnessed a young couple pledging their love beneath its shade on a spring afternoon, whispering promises meant to last a lifetime. It recalled the nights when sailors, lost in the fog, found their way thanks to its imposing silhouette atop the hill, and, most warmly, it felt the soft touch of tiny claws belonging to fledglings that had once learned to fly from its safest branches. In the real world, while the oak dreamed, Leah returned to the hill. The storm had passed, leaving the snow piled like a white carpet crunching under her steps. She carried a basket filled with ornaments and colorful ribbons. Upon arriving, she began singing a carol that echoed in the stillness of the landscape. Her childish voice, sweet and melodic, mingled with the frosty air as though it sought to warm the heart of the tree. While decorating its accessible branches, Leah spoke aloud as if the oak could hear her. "You look beautiful tonight," she said while hanging a star on one of the wooden figures she had carved herself. "I promised this Christmas would be special, and here I am." Her words and songs seemed to wrap the oak in a mantle of affection that transcended its dream. Back in its dream world, the oak felt the struggle between the yearning to keep living and the desire to finally rest. Storms and droughts had left deep marks on its body, but the moments of connection and joy had nourished it in ways no roots could explain. Amid the echoes of laughter, tears, and villagers' songs, the oak realized its life had been a perfect blend of pain and beauty. As Leah sang her final carol beneath the stars, the oak, still in its dream, found itself surrounded by the same melody. For a moment, the weight of centuries seemed to lift, leaving only the certainty that every moment, good or bad, had been an invaluable gift. Deep in its dream, the oak felt an enveloping warmth rise from its roots, slowly ascending its trunk until it reached the highest branches. It wasn't the searing heat of fire, nor the gentle embrace of the spring sun. It was something entirely different. It was a luminous energy that filled it with lightness, as though the gravity binding it to the earth for centuries was finally fading away. Suddenly, the oak began to ascend, not physically, but in essence. Its roots, once deeply anchored in the ground, disappeared, freeing it to rise into the air. Its branches pierced the clouds, and its canopy stretched out to touch the sky. Then, like a whisper from the universe, the oak found itself among the stars. From that height, the world revealed itself in all its magnitude and beauty. It could see the sea shimmering like a mirror under the moon, the hill it had called home glowing softly with snow, and the winding paths leading to the village where the lights of the houses glowed warmly in the night. The oak felt that its existence, both vast and small, had been part of something far greater and more wondrous. But the oak was not alone. As it ascended, it saw the mayflies dancing around it, their tiny bodies glowing like little stars. "I told you," one of them whispered with a light laugh. "Our lives don't end, they simply transform." The birds that had nested in its branches flew beside it, spreading their wings as if the sky belonged entirely to them. Even the souls of the villagers, those who had sought refuge under its shade, seemed to accompany it, filled with gratitude and awe. In this space beyond the earthly realm, the oak understood something it had always suspected but could never express. Its life had been a bridge, a connection between earth and sky, between humanity and nature, between the ephemeral and the eternal. Every leaf that had fallen, every branch that had offered shelter, and every shadow that had provided rest had been part of that bridge linking the lives of others. Eager to share this realization, the oak extended its essence. The vision expanded, touching every creature that had accompanied it on its journey. The mayflies, who had lived only a day, now understood eternity in an instant. The birds, who had always looked to the sky with longing, felt the entire universe in the beat of their wings. And the villagers, though they knew in their hearts they were dreaming, felt a peace so profound that they awoke with tears of joy. From its place among the stars, the oak longed to remain forever, a witness to the vastness of the cosmos. But something called it back, a final whisper from the earth that still needed it. And so, with the same serenity with which it had ascended, it began to descend, carrying with it the certainty that its life had been a beacon of light and connection for all who had ever surrounded it. As it returned, the oak felt its time on earth drawing to a close. But now, it knew it had not been in vain. It had been more than a tree. It had been a bridge, a refuge, a guardian, and soon the cycle would complete itself, like the seasons it had so deeply cherished. The storm arrived without warning, as if nature had decided to unleash all its fury in a single night. The wind roared over the hill, howling like a hungry wolf, and the snow lashed so fiercely that even the walls of the village houses trembled. Amid the chaos, the old oak stood its ground, though each gust made its trunk creak and its bare branches bend under the accumulating weight of the snow. From her window, Leah looked toward the hill, her heart tight with fear. The tree was covered in white, and the ribbons and wooden figures she had hung days earlier seemed on the verge of being torn away by the wind. Something within her, an impulse stronger than fear, compelled her to act. She grabbed a thick cloth she had planned to use to decorate the tree and stepped out into the freezing night air. She climbed the hill with difficulty, battling the icy gusts that nearly knocked her to the ground. Each step was a struggle, but she couldn't stop. "I'm going to protect you," she murmured over and over, as if the tree could hear her. When she finally reached the oak's base, her breath came in labored clouds, and her hands were numb from the cold. The oak, though trapped in its dream, felt her presence. Somewhere within its consciousness, still intertwined with the stars and the cosmos, it perceived Leah's determination and her small body braving the storm's fury. It felt pride and deep affection for this girl who would not abandon it, even in the worst of moments. Leah draped the cloth over one of its lower branches, trying to shield it from the wind, but then she heard a terrifying sound, a deep crack echoing from the oak's trunk. The tree's roots, which had anchored the hill for centuries, began to give way under the pressure of the wind and the weight of the snow. Still dreaming, the oak felt fear, not for itself, but for the girl. If it fell, it could crush her. "Don't give up," Leah shouted, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Her trembling hands tried to secure the cloth, but the tree creaked again, louder this time. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. A gust of wind threw Leah backward, and as she fell into the snow, a bolt of lightning lit up the sky, revealing a scene that seemed straight out of a dream. The migratory birds that had left weeks earlier returned, forming a whirlwind above the tree. The wooden figures Leah had hung swayed in the wind, and, for a moment, seemed to emit a faint light. Even the snow, which had been falling in violent spirals, began to calm around the oak, as if the storm had met something it could not destroy. Leah stood up, trembling but unharmed. She looked at the tree, and though she didn't understand what was happening, She felt the oak speaking to her in silence. "Go," it seemed to say. "I have fulfilled my purpose." Tears streamed down her cheeks, freezing instantly, but she obeyed. She stepped back a few paces, taking shelter behind a rock as the wind intensified once more. With what little strength it had left, the oak anchored its roots deeper into the earth to remain upright for just a moment longer. It did this not for itself, but for Leah, to ensure she was out of harm's way. Its trunk creaked again, this time with a final sound, like the last note of a melody. And then, in an act of surrender, the oak let the storm take it. Its branches bent toward the ground, and its trunk gave way with a thunderous crash that echoed across the hill. When it was over, the tree lay on the ground, covered in snow, but the girl was safe. An unusual calm filled the air, as if even nature had paused to honor the fallen giant. In the depths of its dream, the oak floated in a vast expanse of light and calm. There was no wind, no storm, no cold, only a serene warmth that enveloped it completely. In this state, it began to understand something it had never fully grasped before. The life it had led was not only its own, but part of a greater, more eternal cycle. Its roots, which had held the hill steady for centuries, would continue their purpose even now that its body had fallen. The soil that had embraced it would drink from its sap, nourishing new seeds, new sprouts, new lives. Its branches, now broken and scattered, would be gathered by the villagers who would find in them shelter, fire, and warmth. And its spirit, that essence which had transcended the wood, would live on in the memories of those who had known it. The oak saw images of what was to come. Children playing on the hill, where its fallen trunk would become a natural bench. Birds nesting in the branches still lying on the ground, and villagers gathering each winter to light bonfires made from its wood, telling stories of the great tree that had protected the village for generations. Every action, every memory, tied it even more closely to the living. As it contemplated this vision, a warm presence called out to it. It was Leah. In this dreamlike space, the girl appeared clearly, her figure illuminated by the same light that surrounded it. She was seated under its shade, as she so often had been, with her notebook in hand and a calm expression, as if she knew she was safe. "Is it you?" Leah asked, though she didn't expect a direct answer. "I knew you would never leave me." The oak wanted to speak, but words were not its way of communicating. Instead, it sent a wave of emotion that enveloped the girl. It was a simple message, yet rich in meaning. "I am always with you." Leah closed her eyes and smiled, as if she had heard those words in the depths of her heart. Back in the village, at dawn, Leah awoke in her bed with a sense of calm she hadn't felt throughout the stormy night. She got up and climbed the hill, where the first rays of light revealed the form of the fallen oak, covered in snow but majestic even in its final state. The girl knelt beside the trunk, placing her hands on the cold wood. "Thank you," she whispered. She didn't know why, but she felt certain the oak had done everything it could to protect her, to protect them all. A strange peace filled the air. The broken branches of the oak glistened under the sunlight, as if they still held a fragment of the star it had touched in its dream, and in the silence, Leah heard a faint whisper carried by the wind. "I am always with you." Dawn brought a solemn silence to the hill. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the landscape, revealing the old oak fallen, covered by a shimmering blanket of snow. The villagers, concerned about the storm the previous night, climbed together to the hill, guided by a shared feeling in their hearts. When they arrived, they found the scene. The giant that had dominated the hill for centuries now lay prone, its trunk split and its branches scattered. But what moved them most was seeing Leah curled up beneath one of its great branches, safe and sound. The girl was awake, still clutching the cloth she had brought for the tree and with an expression of peace on her face. "It fell to protect me," she said in a calm voice, as if the answer had already reached her heart. The villagers exchanged glances, feeling that there was truth in her words. To them, the old oak had not just been a tree, it was a guardian, a refuge, a symbol of their community. And now, even in its end, it had fulfilled its purpose. With respect and gratitude, the villagers began to work. They gathered the strongest branches of the oak and, following an old tradition, built a shelter at the top of the hill. It was a place where travelers could rest, where children could play, and where future generations could have a tangible reminder of the tree that had been their protector. From the root system, which had anchored the oak to the earth, they extracted the most noble wood and gave it to the village's artisans. With that wood, they crafted musical instruments, violins, guitars, and flutes, each with a warm and resonant tone that seemed to carry the spirit of the tree. When the villagers heard the first notes, it was as if the oak spoke again, its voice transformed into melodies that would fill the air for years. "It's as if it's still alive," said one of the elders, running his hand over the smooth grain of a newly finished violin. "In every note, in every shadow of the shelter, its spirit is with us." Leah, for her part, returned to the hill every day, sitting next to the shelter and writing in her notebook. She drew the tree as she remembered it, majestic, full of life, with wooden figures hanging from its branches. Sometimes, when the wind blew, it seemed she could hear a whisper in the air, a constant reminder of the words the oak had shared with her in its dream. "I am always with you." In the heart of the community, the oak's sacrifice was not seen as a loss, but as a gift. It had given everything it had, its shade, its strength, and finally its very body, to protect those it loved. And now, through the shelter on the hill and the instruments that carried its essence, it would remain a part of their lives, a timeless testament to generosity and love. That night, the hill shone as it never had before. The villagers, holding candles in their hands, climbed together to gather around the shelter built from the old oak's branches. The icy air carried with it a calm that seemed to shield them from the cold, as if the tree still extended its invisible shadow over them. Leah stood at the center of the circle, holding a candle whose flickering light reflected the serenity on her face. In her other hand, she carried a notebook in which she had written a song. It was a simple melody, inspired by the villagers' stories about the oak and the moments of refuge and connection it had provided. When all was silent, Leah closed her eyes and began to sing. Her voice, soft and trembling at first, rose with courage in time with the wind that gently blew across the hill. It was a carol that spoke of the tree that had endured centuries of storms, had offered shade to the weary, and had given its life to protect them. The villagers soon joined in, their voices intertwining with Leah's in a harmony that filled the air. It seemed that every note carried a piece of the oak's spirit, resonating not just in the wind, but in the heart of every person present. The melody reached its peak when, unexpectedly, a gentle breeze swept across the hill, causing the ribbons and wooden figures hanging from the shelter to sway and produce a musical chime. The notes seemed to blend with the villagers' voices, as if the oak itself were participating in the song. "Listen," someone murmured in the group, and everyone fell silent for a moment. In the whisper of the wind, there seemed to be an echo, a response. It was as though the oak wished to thank them in the same way they were honoring it. At the end of the song, Leah stepped forward and placed her notebook inside the shelter, leaving it as an offering to the tree that had meant so much to her. "We will never forget you," she said, her voice steady even though her eyes shimmered with tears. "Your spirit will live in us and in our songs." That night, the hill, illuminated by candles and resonating with the melody of the carol, became a sacred place. The villagers felt that they were not alone, that the oak remained with them, not just as a memory, but as a constant presence in their lives. And every year, on the same night, they would return to sing the carol of the oak, ensuring its legacy would never fade. Decades passed since that stormy night when the old oak fell, but its legacy remained alive on the hill it had protected for centuries. The roots that had once anchored its trunk to the ground slowly decomposed, enriching the soil with their nutrients. The birds, which had always considered it home, carried its seeds far and wide, dropping them with almost magical precision around the hill. Soon, the first saplings began to sprout. At first, the villagers carefully tended to the young shoots, protecting them from wind and cold, as if they were raising the old oak's children. One by one, the young trees grew tall and strong, their branches stretching toward the sky as if reaching for the stars. Each spring, the new oaks blossomed, and over time, the hill transformed into a vibrant forest that offered shade, refuge, and life to all who came near. At the center of the forest, the shelter built from the old oak's branches still stood. Now, it was a place where children played, sharing stories about the great tree that had once stood there. The villagers continued celebrating their carol every Christmas, and the melodies played on the instruments crafted from its wood resonated in the community, carrying the spirit of the tree. One day, now advanced in years, Leah returned to the hill. Her steps were slower, but her eyes shone with the same curiosity and love she had felt as a child. When she reached the forest, she stopped, marveling at how the new generations of oaks had risen toward the sky. It was as if the old tree had never left, as if its essence had multiplied, filling the hill with life and beauty. Near the shelter, a group of children played under the branches of one of the largest oaks. Their laughter filled the air, and Leah couldn't help but smile. One of the children carried a notebook and was sketching the tree, while others gathered fallen leaves to make garlands. The scene was an echo of her own childhood, a circle that closed with each generation finding in the forest a place of joy and connection. Leah sat in the shelter and let the breeze caress her face. She closed her eyes, and for a moment it felt as though she were once again beneath the old oak, listening to the whisper of its branches. In her heart, she knew the tree was still there, not only in the new oak that now covered the hill, but in every note of the songs, every story told, and every life it had touched. The rebirth of the old oak was not just a forest, it was an unbreakable connection between the past and the present. A legacy that would endure as long as roots embraced the earth and branches reached for the sky.